Have you heard of a term called legislating from the bench or judicial overreach and want to know why conservatives feel this is so bad? Well, I'm going to give you an example of a time in American history where judicial overreach helped bring forth one of the bloodiest conflicts in world history, where over 600,000 people died. That's the American Civil War, and we're starting right now. This time around, we're going to talk about one of the most infamous and important cases in United States history, the Dred Scott case. We're going to learn about Mr. Scott, his wife, his family, and their 11-year struggle for freedom. We're going to learn about their frustrations, their setbacks on their way to the highest court in the land. We're also going to learn about how this decision also helped to bring on the American Civil War, how judicial overreach today is a warning for us in an equally divided culture to also walk away. Let's begin. Now, who was Dred Scott? Dred Scott was a slave who was born in the 1790s, and he was in Alabama, where he was sold to a guy named John Emerson. Emerson took Dred Scott to the Wisconsin Territory, which was a free state. There, Dred Scott met his future wife, Harriet Robinson, where they married and had 2 children. That meant that John Emerson owned the entire family. In 1846, John Emerson moved Dred, his wife Harriet, and their family to St. Louis, Missouri. It was there where Emerson died and left his slaves to his widow. Dred Scott knew that there was a doctrine that said, once you're free, you're always free. Meaning, if you are a slave and you're taken to a territory which is free, as in the Wisconsin Territory, then you're always free. And so it was at this time in 1846 where Dred Scott began to file paperwork for his freedom. It was this paperwork that took 11 years to finally reach the Supreme Court, and the decision came down in 1857. So as you may know, when the decision came down from the Supreme Court in 1857, it wasn't favorable for Dred. It was a 7-2 decision against, where there were 3 opinions in this case. Number 1 was that blacks had no rights in federal court. Because Dred Scott was not a citizen, the Supreme Court did not have jurisdiction in this case. In fact, here's what Chief Justice Taney, a Democrat, wrote. In the opinion of the court, the legislation and histories of the time, and the language used in the Declaration of Independence show that neither the class of persons who had been imported as slaves, nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were then acknowledged as part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. So the second opinion that came down was that slave states did not have to abide by the once free, always free clause. The Supreme Court's justification was the fact that they considered slaves as property. Using that status, they looked to colonial laws and the Fifth Amendment to state that if you're a property, it doesn't matter where you go in federal territory, that property goes with the individual who owns that property, and therefore you can't be separated from that without due process. They went on to say that because of that property status, that leaving one state and going to another made no difference whatsoever legally. So this brings us to the third opinion, and this is the big one. The Supreme Court said that Congress never should allow the free territories, such as Wisconsin, in the first place. So what's important here is that this ruling effectively struck down the Missouri Compromise, which was an act of Congress. This is only the second time in history where the Supreme Court overruled a law by Congress. The case was a 7-2 decision, 7-4, 2 against. The 2 against later became Republican. So you had Taney, Wayne, Catron, Daniel, Nelson, Greer, and Campbell all opposed, and you had McLean and Curtis, who were the 2 dissensions. McLean and Curtis, the 2 dissensions, argued that because slaves could vote in 10 of the 13 states at the time of the founding that they were citizens. And if they were citizens, they were applicable to the once free, always free clause, and therefore Dred Scott and his family should be set free. So what does all this have to do with judicial overreach? And what does it have to do with the walk away movement? Well, if we look at the Declaration of Independence, where it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So let's go back again. The Supreme Court classified slaves as property, but in the Declaration of Independence, it said all men are created equal and endowed by unalienable rights that were given to them by their Creator. The Missouri Compromise was also a law that was set up by Congress to help settle the slave problem. This decision came down 2 days after the inauguration of James Buchanan, and James Buchanan was known as a Southern appeaser. And so the overreach comes in simply because the Supreme Court did not adhere to the Missouri Compromise, nor did it adhere to the basic principles of the Declaration of Independence. Conservatives believe in a principle that our rights come from God, not from government. The Founding Fathers knew this because they saw it. They saw governments coming into areas, conquering, enslaving the people, and creating tyranny. This is what they were trying to leave in Europe in King George III. So in founding this country, that was the whole underlying principle. The rights of the individual, not of the government, are what's most important here. The founders set up a system of checks and balances where you have the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the law, and the judicial branch, in this case the Supreme Court, interprets the law based on original intent. And so we see how the Dred Scott case is a warning for us, and it shows us what can happen when one branch, in this case judicial branch, oversteps its bounds. Instead of interpreting the laws based on their original intent, they try to create laws. And that was the problem with Dred Scott. And we see that same thing down the line with other cases, even today. Just because a group cannot get a law passed doesn't mean that they can go get a judge or a federal court to overrule the will of the people. So when you're talking with a person who's upset because an issue didn't go their way, and you're thinking, well, it's because the court overstepped their bounds, you can remind them of Dred Scott. Because of this ruling, Mr. Scott and his family remained slaves. Dred Scott, however, did eventually become free through other means, but he died within 2 years of him seeing it. This case, the Dred Scott case, deeply divided the North, and it rapidly accelerated the timeline for the Civil War, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And we also can see down the line, 116 years later, the same type of principle where people are property also helped to influence a case in 1973, Roe versus Wade. But we're going to sell that for another video. So that's it for part 2. Part 3 is coming out next week. I'm going to try and do these twice a week. The second video is going to be a little less formal. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon so that you can be informed when these new videos do come out. Comment below. Let me know what you think. How am I doing with this series? What kind of topics would you like to see? Until next time, remember, learning from the past helps us relate to the future. Thank you. Until next time.